A waitress, invisible to the world, carries a tray worth more than her apartment. A billionaire, the center of the universe, laughs with his friends, scrawling a joke on a napkin, a secret language only the elite can understand. But the joke is wrong, dangerously wrong. When the invisible waitress stops, her voice shaking, and corrects his math, the laughter freezes. The billionaire is humiliated, but his humiliation turns to ice-cold dread when he investigates the woman who just served him coffee. She isn't just a waitress. She's a ghost, and she's the one person on Earth who knows the fatal secret hidden at the heart of his billion-dollar empire. The restaurant was called The Apex, and it took its name seriously. It sat on the 95th floor of the city's tallest skyscraper, a glass and steel temple dedicated to obscene wealth. The air was pressurized, the lighting was curated to make diamonds and dental veneers sparkle, and the cheapest appetizer cost more than Elena Sanchez's monthly electricity bill. Elena, 29, was a ghost in this temple. Her uniform, a stark black dress with a crisp white apron, was a costume of invisibility. She moved with a practiced, economical grace, her worn-out black flats making no sound on the imported marble floors. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were perpetually scanning, anticipating, and calculating. Table 9 needs water. Table 11 is looking for the check. The hostess just sat a 4-top in section 3. She was, by all accounts, an excellent waitress, punctual, precise, and perfectly forgettable, which was exactly how she wanted it. Her life was a small, tightly controlled loop, a tiny studio apartment filled with books she'd read a dozen times, a long bus ride, and the 10-hour shifts at the Apex. She owed $60,000 in student loans for a degree she pretended she didn't have, and she was perpetually 3 weeks away from financial ruin. This job, this humiliating, exhausting, high-paying performance, was the only thing keeping her afloat. Tonight, the air in the Apex was thicker than usual, charged with the static electricity of power. The commotion was centered on the prime table, the one with the panoramic view of the city lights, table 7. It was Julian Thorne's table. Elena didn't need the hostess to tell her. Julian Thorne was a man who occupied space with the gravity of a small planet. At 38, he was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a private aerospace and energy conglomerate that was devouring the world. He had a face that belonged on a Roman coin, sharp, arrogant, and handsome, and a laugh that was less about humor and more about announcing his own presence. He was here with 3 other men, all cut from the same bolt of expensive dark wool cloth. They were loud, their voices slicing through the carefully cultivated hush of the restaurant. They were celebrating. "Helios is a go," Julian announced, raising his glass of $800 scotch. "The final simulation tests are green. By this time next month, we won't just be in the energy market. We will be the energy market." His companions, a sycophantic venture capitalist named Robert Davies and a bullish board member named Henry Croft, cheered. The third man, quieter, with the watchful eyes of a hawk, was Marcus Vance, Thorne's head of security and personal fixer. He drank water. Elena glided by, refilling water glasses, her expression perfectly neutral. She'd heard it all before. The masters of the universe, redrawing the maps of their empires between the soup and the steak. It was just noise. "The beauty of it, Julian," slurred Robert Davies, "is that nobody else has the tech. The core, what did your father call it? The Thorne Cascade?" Julian smiled, a tight, self-satisfied expression. "My father was a visionary. He found the key. We just finally built the door." Elena's spine stiffened, just for a fraction of a second, a name she hadn't heard in 5 years. Aris Thorne, the father, the visionary, the thief. She blocked it out. She had to. That life was dead. Dr. Evelyn Reed was dead. There was only Elena Sanchez, the waitress, who desperately needed the 30% tip this table would probably leave. She moved to clear the bread plates. As she leaned in near Julian, he was grabbing a heavy linen napkin and pulling a $100 to $200 gold pen from his jacket. "You want to see the secret language?" Julian said to his fawning audience. "The real source?" He scrawled something on the napkin. It wasn't a language. It was an equation. Elena saw it out of the corner of her eye. She saw the familiar cluster of Greek letters, the tensors, the partial derivatives. It was her work, the work that had been her life, her passion, her soul, before it had been ripped away. But what she saw made her blood run cold. It wasn't just her work, it was wrong. Julian Thorne held the napkin up like a trophy. His colleagues leaned in, pretending to understand. "See?" Julian said, tapping the equation with his pen. "Standard quantum field theory, but with the Thorne inversion. Right here." He pointed to a specific part of the notation, where a Hamiltonian operator was linked with a geometric tensor. Everyone else tried to balance the energy yield. My father, he realized you don't balance it. You force it. You invert the cascade. You create a controlled energy resonance, and poof, infinite, clean power. Robert Davies nodded sagely. "Brilliant. Truly brilliant, Julian. It's like a secret code for the universe." Henry Croft just grunted. "As long as it makes the stock jump, you can write it in hieroglyphics for all I care." Elena was frozen. She was holding a silver tray loaded with dirty plates, and she couldn't move. Her mind, the part of her she kept locked away, the part that used to calculate the spin of quarks and the architecture of space-time, was screaming. "He's wrong. He's not just wrong. He's dangerously, catastrophically wrong." The equation he had scrawled, the Thorne inversion, wasn't a key to infinite power. It was a bomb. He hadn't inverted the cascade. He had, in his arrogant simplification, removed the safeguards that governed the energy's harmonic decay. The system wouldn't create a controlled resonance. It would create an uncontrolled one. It would feed back on itself exponentially until the core couldn't contain the energy density. It wouldn't poof. It would detonate. It was a recipe for a small, localized supernova. She remembered the night she'd run the simulation 5 years ago. The night she discovered this exact fatal flaw. The night she had tried to warn her mentor, Aris Thorne. "Don't say anything," the terrified, practical part of her brain, Elena Sanchez, pleaded. "Walk away. It's not your problem. You're a waitress. You need this job." But the other part of her, the brilliant, furious and betrayed part, Dr. Evelyn Reed, was choking on the lie. He was going to kill people. He was going to build this thing, this Helios project, based on a stolen, fundamentally misunderstood theory, and it was going to blow up. "It's just beautiful," Julian sighed, admiring his own handiwork on the napkin. "A perfect little secret." The words slipped out of Elena's mouth before she could stop them. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse. "That's not what that means." The silence that fell on the table was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound from the 95th floor. The distant clink of cutlery from other tables seemed a mile away. Julian Thorne's head swiveled toward her. His blue eyes, moments before warm with self-congratulation, turned to chips of ice. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was quiet, but it had the sharp edge of a razor. Elena's heart was a drum against her ribs. Her hands, holding the heavy tray, began to tremble. I'm sorry, sir. I misspoke. Excuse me." She tried to turn, to flee. "Stop!" Julian's command cut through the air. She froze, her back to him. "Turn around," he ordered. Slowly, Elena turned. She kept her eyes down, fixed on the knot of his silk tie. "You said something," Julian said, standing up. He was tall, 6'3" at least, and he used his height as a weapon. He loomed over her. "I believe you said, 'That's not what that means.' Please elaborate. What exactly does a waitress think my equation means?" Robert Davies and Henry Croft were snickering. This was Sport, the lion, toying with the mouse. Marcus Vance, the security man, just watched Eleanor, his expression unreadable. Eleanor's fear was suddenly eclipsed by a white-hot flash of anger, an anger she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 5 years, the sheer, towering arrogance of this man who was coasting on a legacy of theft, who was about to kill people out of sheer, willful ignorance. She looked up. For the first time that night, she made direct eye contact with Julian Thorne. Her stormy grey eyes met his icy blue ones. "I said," she repeated, her voice clearer now, cold and precise, "that's not what that means. You're treating the Hamiltonian as a simple scalar quantity. It's not. It's a tensor field. You can't just invert it. You've failed to account for the non-linear coupling. The Thorne inversion doesn't create a controlled resonance. It creates a feedback loop." The snickering stopped. Julian's smile was gone. His face had gone pale. Elena continued, the words pouring out of her, the complex physics as natural to her as breathing. "The decay constant you've omitted. It's not optional. It's the only thing that prevents a catastrophic energy cascade. What you've written on that napkin, it's not a secret language for infinite power. It's a detonation sequence, and a very efficient one at that." The silence at table 7 was no longer just a pause. It was a wound. Robert Davies's jaw was slack, his brilliant forgotten. Henry Croft looked confused, like a bull trying to understand a chess problem. Julian Thorne just stared at Eleanor. His mask of smooth, confident charm had cracked, and underneath was something raw and furious. He was being challenged. No, he was being lectured. In his restaurant, in front of his people, by a woman holding a tray of his discarded bread crusts. "A tensor field," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "A non-linear coupling." He let out a short, sharp laugh, but it was brittle. "And where exactly did you pick up those phrases? Physics for dummies?" He was trying to reclaim the narrative, to paint her as a pretentious overreacher. "Sir," Elena said, her voice steady. She set the heavy tray down on a nearby service stand. Her hands were no longer shaking. The terror was gone, replaced by the cold, exhilarating calm of a problem to be solved. "You're misunderstanding the foundational principles of your own technology. You're referencing the work of Dr. Evelyn Reed, I presume?" At the mention of the name, Julian's eyes narrowed. "Everyone in the field knows Reed's work." "It seems you don't," Elena said flatly. "Reed's central thesis, the Reed paradox, wasn't about forcing a resonance. It was about the instability of quantum cascades. Her entire body of work was a warning against exactly what you've scrawled on that napkin. You're not building on her work, you're ignoring it." "And you are?" Julian sneered. "A hidden expert? A PhD in waitressing?" "I'm just someone who reads," Elena said, the lie tasting like ash. "You're about to run a test on Project Helios, aren't you? A full-power simulation." Julian didn't answer. His stony silence was answer enough. "Don't," Elena said, and her voice was no longer cold. It was a plea. "If you run that simulation with the parameters you've written, The core will breach containment in less than 4 picoseconds. The resulting energy release, it won't just be a failed experiment. It will be an explosion you can't walk away from. Julian Thorne had built his entire identity on being the smartest man in the room. He had inherited his father's company and, he believed, his father's genius. This woman, with her cheap shoes and her damningly precise vocabulary, had just dismantled him in front of his inner circle. "Get her out of here," Julian snapped, not to Eleanor, but to the restaurant manager who was now rushing over, his face ashen. "Mr. Thorne, sir, I am so sorry, I don't know what. I want her fired, now, and have her escorted from the building," Julian commanded. Elena didn't protest. She had already accepted the consequences. She had said her piece. She turned, picked up her tray, and began walking toward the service bay. "Elena, my office, now!" The manager, a frantic man named Charles, hissed at her. But Julian wasn't finished. "Wait," he called out. Elena stopped again. He walked over to her, his face a mask of controlled fury. He looked her up and down, as if truly seeing her for the first time, not as a ghost, but as an anomaly, an insect that had spoken out of turn. "What's your name?" he demanded. "Elena Sanchez, sir." "Elena Sanchez," he repeated, rolling the name around in his mouth as if it tasted foul. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. You have no idea who you just insulted." Elena met his gaze one last time. "And you, sir," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the hush, "have no idea what you are building." She turned and walked away, leaving Julian Thorne standing alone in the center of his expensive temple, the scribbled napkin still clutched in his hand. Marcus Vance, the silent security chief, watched her go. He hadn't said a word. He didn't look at the manager or at his enraged boss. He just watched Elena's back until she disappeared through the kitchen doors. Then he discreetly pulled out his phone and typed a simple message to his analytics team. "Find out everything there is on an Elena Sanchez." Right now, Elena didn't even wait to be officially fired, as Charles, the manager, started his panicked tirade in the office. "Have you lost your mind? Do you know who that was?" Eleanor was already untying her apron. "I'm sorry, Charles. You're right, I quit," she said, cutting him off. She grabbed her thin jacket and her backpack from the staff locker. She didn't have much. A few books, a spare charger, a worn-out wallet. She bypassed the service elevator and took the stairs. She ran down all 95 flights of them. Her mind was a storm. Stupid, stupid, stupid. For 5 years, she had maintained perfect discipline. For 5 years, she had been Elena Sanchez, the invisible woman, the ghost. She had moved 3 times, never stayed in one job for more than a year, paid for everything in cash or with a single, low-limit credit card, and never, ever talked about physics. She had built a fortress of mediocrity around herself, and in 5 minutes she had torn it down. All for what? To correct an arrogant fool? He was going to kill people. The other voice, Evelyn's voice, argued back. He was building a bomb based on your work. She burst out of the stairwell into the ground floor lobby, gasping for air. The city noise hit her like a physical blow. She pulled her hood up and disappeared into the crowd, her heart hammering, not from the run, but from pure, unadulterated terror. She knew what men like Julian Thorne and his father, Aris, did to people who got in their way. She got to her apartment, a small, bleak studio in a rundown neighborhood, and didn't turn on the lights. She immediately went to the loose floorboard under her bed. Beneath it was a small metal box. Inside, a fake passport with a different name, Sarah Jennings, $10,000 in cash, and a burner phone, the in-case-of-emergency kit. This was an emergency. As she packed her bag, the memories she had fought so hard to suppress came flooding back. 5 years ago. Dr. Evelyn Reed, 24 years old, the prodigy of MIT, the youngest physicist to ever be offered a full fellowship at CERN. She had been recruited personally by the legendary Eris Thorne, founder of Thorne Dynamics. He was her mentor, her idol, her father figure. She had been working on a theory of quantum energy extraction. She had found a pathway, a way to tap the zero-point field. It was revolutionary. Eris was ecstatic. He called it Helios, after the sun god. But then, Evelyn found the flaw, the one she had just explained to Julian Thorne, the instability, the cascade. She remembered the night she brought it to Eris in his vast, book-lined study. "Eris, it's unstable," she'd said, her hand shaking as she held up the printouts. "The models all show a catastrophic failure. We have to stop. We have to publish this as a warning." Eris Thorne hadn't looked worried. He had looked annoyed. He had taken the printouts from her. "You're tired, Evelyn. Your model is wrong. You're just a postdoc, after all. You're letting the numbers scare you." "Eris, no, the math is sound." "The math," he had said, his voice suddenly cold, "is what I say it is. This project is worth hundreds of billions. It's my legacy. A little girl's scary numbers are not going to get in the way." That night, she was locked out of the lab. Her files were seized. When she threatened to go public, Eris had smiled. "Go public with what? Your fellowship is terminated. Your research is the property of Thorne Dynamics." And frankly, who are they going to believe? Me? Or a hysterical, unpublished graduate student? He had stolen her work. All of it. He intended to build Helios anyway, ignoring her warnings, likely believing his engineers could fix the flaw she found. 2 days later, her apartment was broken into. Her personal laptop was gone. She was being followed. She realized Eris wasn't just trying to discredit her. He was trying to erase her. So she ran. She vanished. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the rising star, became a ghost. She became Elena Sanchez, a waitress. A notification flashed on her burner phone. She had set up alerts years ago. Keyword alerts: Thorne Dynamics, Helios, Eris Thorne. Eris Thorne had died 2 years ago. A heart attack. Julian had taken over, and now Julian was finally building his father's stolen, broken dream. She had to run. Again. Meanwhile, back in his penthouse, Julian Thorne was staring at a blank screen. Marcus Vance stood by the window. "The server from the restaurant. She was hired 6 months ago," Vance reported, his voice a calm monotone. "Social security number is valid. Credit score is 620. Has an Elena Sanchez driver's license. No criminal record. 1 outstanding parking ticket." "That's it?" Julian snapped. "That's it? She just dismantled 5 years of R&D, and all you can tell me is that she has a parking ticket?" "The identity is the problem, Mr. Thorne," Vance said. "It's clean. Too clean. Elena Sanchez was born 29 years ago, but she didn't exist in any database until 5 years ago. No school records, no medical history, no social media. Nothing. Before 5 years ago, she was a ghost." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Elena Sanchez is a cover, a deep, professional-level cover." Vance turned from the window. "I ran facial recognition against every database I have access to, academic, government, private. It took a while. The algorithm had to cross-reference with low-quality symposium feeds. But I got a match." An image up on the main screen. It was a grainy photo, clearly a screenshot from a video. A much younger woman, her face bright, animated, was standing in front of a whiteboard covered in equations. "Her name," Vance said, "is Dr. Evelyn Reed." Julian's blood went cold. He knew that name. It was a legend, a myth in the physics community. The prodigy who had published 3 groundbreaking papers on quantum dynamics and then vanished off the face of the earth. And it was the name she had spoken. "Evelyn Reed," Julian breathed. "My father. He talked about her. He said he'd tried to hire her, but she was unstable, too erratic. According to her academic records, she was the lead fellow on your father's Helios research team, right up until she disappeared," Vance said. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. The stolen work, the unstable prodigy, the waitress. "The floor she mentioned," Julian said, his voice barely a whisper. "The Cascade. Find my father's original Helios files, the private ones, the ones from his study." Vance nodded. "Already on it." Julian walked to the window, staring down at the city 95 floors below. The city his project was supposed to power. He felt a tremor of a feeling he wasn't familiar with, genuine, terrifying fear. "She wasn't insulting me," he said to the glass. "She was warning me." It took Marcus Vance less than an hour to bypass the encryption on Aris Thorne's private server. The files were buried deep in a folder labeled ER Contingency. Julian sat at his massive obsidian desk, a glass of untouched scotch sweating beside him. "Show me," he commanded. Vance projected the files onto the wall. They weren't the clean, polished proposals and marketing decks that Julian had inherited. These were raw, scanned pages of notebooks, complex simulations, and heated email chains, and they were all authored by Dr. Evelyn Reed. For 2 hours Julian read. He too had a background in applied physics, but this was on another level. This was the work of a genius. It was elegant, brilliant, and utterly terrifying. And then he found it. A simulation file dated 5 years ago. The title, Cascade Failure, Urgent. He ran the simulation. His own workstation, a quantum computer worth $50 million, churned through the data. Julian watched as the colored lines on the graph representing energy output spiked. They didn't just climb, they went vertical. The simulation ended with a single, stark word. Containment breach. Core failure. T+1 12 picoseconds. It was exactly what she had said. "Mr. Thorne," Vance said, his voice quiet. "There's more." He pulled up another file. It was a video, the same grainy footage from the symposium, but with audio. It was Evelyn Reed, 5 years younger, her face alive with passion, explaining her work. She was luminous, she was brilliant, and she was, without a shadow of a doubt, the woman who had served him his coffee tonight, the woman he had insulted, mocked, and had thrown out of the building. "My God," Julian whispered. He wasn't praying. He was realizing. He had just threatened the one person on Earth who truly understood his life's work. He looked at the simulation data again, then at the equation he had so arrogantly scrawled on the napkin, the Thorne inversion. "Where did my father get this?" Julian demanded, holding up the napkin. "This exact notation. It's not in her files." Vance brought up another document. This one was in Aris Thorne's own handwriting. It was a summary of Reed's work, but it was simpler. Julian scanned the page, his eyes racing, and then he saw it. Aris Thorne, the visionary, had tried to fix Evelyn's flaw. He hadn't understood her warning. He had dismissed her complex, multivariable safeguards as unnecessary academic clutter. He had simplified her equation, crossing out her stabilization terms and writing in his own. The Thorne inversion wasn't a secret key. It was a mistake. It was his father's mistake. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The $40 billion Helios project, the legacy he was building, the technology that was going to change the world. It was all based on a fundamental, fatal error. An error made by his own father, who had stolen the work of a 24-year-old genius, and then hadn't even been smart enough to understand it. "She wasn't correcting me," Julian said, his voice shaking with a cold fury. "She was correcting him. His father hadn't just been a thief, he had been an incompetent one, and he, Julian, had been a fool. He had blindly followed, building his empire on a foundation of sand. No, not sand, a foundation of C4. "The test," Julian said, jumping to his feet. "The full power test at the Nevada facility. When is it?" Vance checked his tablet. "It was moved up. Your VP of Operations, Sarah Jenkins, wanted to impress the board. It's scheduled for tomorrow morning, 800. Julian looked at the clock. It was 1 a.m. They had 7 hours. "Shut it down," Julian yelled. "Shut it all down. Get Jenkins on the phone. Send the kill order. Everything. Now." "And what do I tell them?" Vance asked. Tell them we have a flaw in the core math, a critical flaw." As Vance moved to make the calls, Julian grabbed his jacket. "Find her," he commanded. "Mr. Thorne?" "Find her. Evelyn Reed, Elena Sanchez, whatever her name is. She's not just a ghost, she's the architect, and she's the only one who knows how to disarm the bomb we just built." Elena's bag was packed. She was standing by the door, keys in hand, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She was about to become Sarah Jennings, move to a new city, find a new menial job, and restart the loop. A hard, sharp knock echoed through the door. Elena froze. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a knock of absolute authority. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. "Ms. Sanchez," a deep voice called from the hallway. "Elena, please, I know you're in there. We need to talk." She didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't Julian Thorne. "My name is Marcus Vance. I'm Mr. Thorne's head of security. Please, he is asking for your help." Elena backed away from the door, her hand gripping the burner phone. "He knows," Vance continued, his voice calm, reasonable. "He knows who you are, Dr. Reed. He knows about the flaw. He's trying to shut down the test right now." A trick, Elena thought. A trick to get me to open the door. They'll drag me out. They'll silence me. "We don't have time for this," a new voice roared, impatient and furious. "Vance, move!" There was a heavy thud, and the door shuddered in its frame. Elena flinched. "Dr. Reed!" It was Julian Thorne. His voice was muffled but unmistakable, crackling with panic. "Evelyn, you were right. You were right about everything. The cascade, the instability. My father's inversion is a mistake. It's a bomb, and I'm scheduled to light the fuse in 7 hours." Elena still said nothing, her back pressed against the peeling paint of her wall. "Listen to me," Julian shouted. And this time his voice was different. The arrogance was gone. It was stripped bare, replaced by raw, primal fear. "I'm not my father. I swear to you. He stole your work. He stole it, and he didn't even understand it. He built a bomb, and I've spent the last 2 years and $40 billion trying to build it." Silence. "I have 200 people at that facility in Nevada," Julian said, his voice dropping, pressing against the door. "Good people, engineers, scientists. They trust me. They trust this tech. And I'm about to incinerate all of them because I was too arrogant to see the truth. Because he was." I can't help you," Elena whispered, her voice so soft she barely heard it herself. "Yes, you can," Julian insisted. "You're the only one who can. The kill order. It might not be enough. The core is already primed. We have to initiate a counter-sequence, a cold shutdown, and the protocols. They're all based on my father's flawed math. We don't even know how to shut it down safely." Elena closed her eyes. She saw the faces of the engineers she used to work with. Smart, dedicated people, all working towards a better future. Now, 200 more just like them were sitting on top of a ticking time bomb. She thought about running. She could be at the bus station in 10 minutes. By 8 a.m., she'd be halfway to Oregon. Sarah Jennings would be safe, but Evelyn Reed would be a murderer. Her silence would kill them all. Slowly, she walked to the door. Her hand trembled as she undid the deadbolt and the chain. She opened it. Julian Thorne stood in the grimy hallway of her apartment building, looking absurdly out of place in his $1,000 suit. His hair was disheveled, his tie was loose, and his blue eyes were wide with a terror she had never thought to see in a man like him. He looked, for the first time, human. Behind him, Marcus Vance stood like a statue, phone to his ear, listening. Julian stared at her. This small, tired woman in a threadbare hoodie. This was the genius his father had tried to break. This was the woman who held the fate of his entire company and the lives of 200 people in her hands. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice raw, "I don't deserve it. My family doesn't deserve it. But those people in Nevada, they do. Please, help me." Elena looked at him for a long, agonizing moment. Then she stepped aside. "Get in," she said, "and bring your laptop. We have work to do." Elena's apartment wasn't just small, it was a shoebox, a cramped third-floor walk-up that smelled faintly of old books and her neighbor's cooking. And into this shoebox, Julian Thorne had brought the full, terrifying weight of his $40 billion catastrophe. He sat hunched on her lumpy futon, a piece of furniture that had clearly been found on a curb. In front of him, on a coffee table made from stacked textbooks, sat his state-of-the-art, wafer-thin quantum laptop. The contrast was staggering. A multi-million-dollar piece of bleeding-edge technology resting on $20 worth of second-hand philosophy. Marcus Vance stood by the door, a silent, granite-like sentinel, his phone pressed to his ear. He was a conduit to the outside world, a calm, low-voiced bridge to the panic-stricken control room in Nevada. "It's worse than I thought," Julian said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was pale, the mask of the billionaire CEO completely gone, replaced by the raw terror of a man who had just read his own obituary. Jenkins shut down the main power-up sequence, but the reactor core is already in a warm state. It's saturated with energy. We can't just flip the off switch. The energy field is primed. Elena, no, the fog of Elena Sanchez was burning away by the second, revealing the sharp, cold, diamond-hard brilliance of Dr. Evelyn Reed, stood over him. The fear that had defined her life for 5 years was gone, replaced by a cold, familiar adrenaline. This was not a restaurant. This was not a personal crisis. This was a problem. "Of course you can't," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of the Waitress softness. "If you initiate a standard shutdown, the energy has nowhere to go. It'll collapse back on itself, destabilize the containment field. It's the same problem as a hot start, just in reverse. You'll still get a cascade. You'll just blow up the building by trying not to blow up the building." "So what do we do?" Julian asked. And in that moment, the power dynamic inverted with the force of a physical blow. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was the student, looking up at the professor. "We don't spin it down," Evelyn said, her mind already racing, 5 years of suppressed calculations flooding back. "We give the energy a new pathway, a release valve. We can't just stop the reaction. We have to change it. We have to rewrite the containment geometry in real time." She looked around the tiny apartment, her eyes landing on a legal pad, the one she used for grocery lists, and a simple ballpoint pen. She snatched them. "Give me the latest telemetry from the core," she commanded, not to Julian, but to Vance. Vance, without blinking, relayed the numbers. Core temperature at 40 million Kelvin. Magnetic flux is stable at 9.4 Teslas. Resonance frequency is holding at... Evelyn began to write. What followed was the most intense 4 hours of Julian Thorne's life. The clock on the microwave ticked past 2 below a.m., then 3 a.m. The apartment became a pressure cooker. Evelyn, fueled by an intellectual fury he had never witnessed, paced the small space, filling page after page with equations so dense they barely looked like math. She was a force of nature. Julian, a brilliant man in his own right, was reduced to the role of a high-speed data entry clerk. He took her handwritten notes and translated them into machine code, running simulation after simulation. Vance became her oracle, feeding her real-time data from the terrified engineers in Nevada. "It's not about forcing it, Julian," she snapped at one point, seeing him struggle with a line of code. "That was your father's mistake. He was a brute. He was trying to use a hammer on a violin string. You don't force the resonance, you guide it. It's a wave. You have to tune it, like a guitar string." "Tune it to what?" Julian asked, his brow furrowed. "To a sympathetic field," she said, as if it were obvious. "The dummy load array. Your father listed it as an emergency heat sink. He never saw what it was really for. It's not a sink, it's a receiver. If we can tune the core's harmonic cascade to match the receiver's frequency, we can create a sympathetic resonance. The energy will bleed off harmlessly. It will want to go there." By 4:15 a.m., they had a model, a complete, complex, terrifyingly elegant shutdown sequence based on her new theory. "Run it!" Evelyn commanded, her voice raw. Julian's fingers flew. He hit enter. They all watched the laptop screen. The simulation began, and it failed. "No!" Julian yelled, slamming his fist on the wobbly table, making the laptop jump. "No, it's not working. The simulation, the dummy load. It can't handle the load. It absorbs the energy, but it can't dissipate it fast enough. It flashes to plasma in 3 seconds. It's the same result, just a different explosion. We're still dead." He put his head in his hands. He was right. My father was right. It's unstable. It can't be done. Evelyn stared at the screen, her chest tight. This was it. The moment. She could give up, let him be right, and run. Or a white-hot rage, 5 years in the making, eclipsed her fear. It was the fury of the creator seeing her work mutilated. She strode over and grabbed the laptop from him. "You're still thinking like him!" she snarled, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're still your father's son. You're trying to push the energy. You're throttling the cascade, trying to shove it into the dummy load. You can't push it. You have to pull it." "What are you talking about?" "You have to create a vacuum," she said, her own fingers flying across the keys, rewriting the core of his code. "A negative pressure gradient. The energy wants to go there. You just have to open the damn door. Invert the polarity of the receiver here, not here. Change the geometry of the pull field, not the push field." She had rewritten 3 fundamental lines of code. She shoved the laptop back at him. "Now, run it again." Julian stared at her, then at the screen. His hands were shaking. He hit enter. The simulation whirred. The room was so quiet, Julian could hear the blood pounding in his ears. On the screen, 2 lines, one red, core energy, one blue, dummy load, began to move. The red line, representing the primed core, began to drop. The blue line, the dummy load, spiked, climbing high, fast, higher, approaching the red failure line. Evelyn held her breath. And then It crested. It held. And then, slowly, gracefully, both lines began to descend together, side by side, in a perfect, stable decay. The energy was dissipating, harmlessly. The simulation ended with a single word. Cold shutdown complete. Julian Thorne let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for his entire life. He looked at the screen, then at the legal pad covered in frantic scrawls, then at the woman standing in front of him. Evelyn Reed sagged, her entire body trembling, the adrenaline deserting her all at once. She stumbled back and sat on the edge of her unmade bed, her head in her hands. She had just rewritten the foundations of quantum energy extraction on a grocery list pad, in a tiny apartment, in 4 hours. Julian just stared at her. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot, but she was, in that moment, the most impressive, terrifying and brilliant human being he had ever met. He finally, truly, understood the chasm of intellect that had separated his father from this woman. "Vance," Julian said, his voice thick, hoarse. "Sir, get the jet ready. We're going to Nevada, now." He looked at Evelyn, who was still trembling. "And get Dr. Reed. Get her a car. Get her anything she needs." Evelyn looked up. She glanced at the packed Sarah Jennings bag by the door, the symbol of her 5 years of running. She stood on shaky legs, walked over to it, unzipped it, and took out a single fresh T-shirt. Then she zipped the bag, walked to her tiny closet, and threw the entire bag into the back, burying it under a pile of old coats. The ghost was dead. "I don't need a car," she said, her voice quiet but iron. "I'm coming with you. Someone needs to make sure your engineers don't hit the wrong button." The sun was a searing white line on the eastern horizon, setting the copper-colored dust of the Nevada desert ablaze. The Thorne Dynamics Gulfstream screamed onto the private runway, its engines whining in protest at the abrupt landing. The Helios facility loomed in the distance, a futuristic dome of white carbon fiber and glass that looked like a moon base dropped into the apocalypse. It was beautiful, sterile, and, as of an hour ago, the most dangerous place on Earth. The moment the stairs hit the tarmac, Julian and Evelyn were moving. They didn't run. They walked with the grim, hurried pace of people who knew the bomb was disarmed, but hadn't yet seen the wiring. They burst through the airlocked doors into the main control room. The atmosphere was a toxic cocktail of stale coffee, sweat, and palpable, lingering terror. 24 engineers, their faces grey with exhaustion, from a night spent staring at their own executions, turned as one. Their eyes passed over Julian Thorne, their boss, and landed on the small, tired-looking woman in a wrinkled sweater beside him. Sarah Jenkins, the vice president of operations who had so eagerly moved up the test, rushed toward them. Her face was pale, her professional composure shattered. "Mr. Thorne, the core, it's cold, it's stable. The shutdown sequence, it worked." She looked at Evelyn, her expression a mixture of awe and utter confusion. "We've never seen anything like it. The energy just dissipated. It was like she was tuning it. Who is this?" Julian didn't pause. He walked to the center of the room, drawing every eye. He put a hand on Evelyn's shoulder, a gesture that was both supportive and a formal presentation. "This," he announced, his voice ringing with a new, sober authority that silenced the room, "is Dr. Evelyn Reed." A collective, sharp intake of breath. The name was a legend, a ghost story they all knew. The mythical prodigy of Eris Thorne's era. "She is the true architect of Project Helios," Julian continued, his gaze sweeping across his team. "And she is the one who just saved every single one of our lives." The engineers stared, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a dawning, dumbstruck reverence. They were looking at the woman who had written their Bible, the one who had come down from the mountain, or in this case, a run-down studio apartment, to save them from their own dogma. Evelyn, however, paid no attention to the stares or the whispers. She was no longer Elena, the ghost. She was Dr. Reed, the conductor. The control room, which had once been Aris Thorne's temple, was her laboratory. She walked past Julian, past the stunned VP, and straight to the main data console. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface, bringing up waveforms, telemetry, and energy decay readouts. The numbers, which had been a symphony of chaos all night, were now quiet, orderly, and stable. "It's stable," she confirmed, her voice quiet, but carrying in the hushed room. She traced a finger along a shimmering blue line on the graph, the data from the dummy load. "But it's not finished," Julian came to her side. "What do you mean? It's a failure. The project is dead, a $40 billion paperweight." "No," Evelyn said. She turned to him, and for the first time, there wasn't anger or fear in her eyes. There was the blinding, focused light of discovery. "It's not dead. It was just wrong. We've been trying to build a hand grenade when we should have been building a radio." She pointed to the screen. "My warning. My original thesis. It wasn't just about the flaw. It was about the potential. Your father stole my work, but he only stole the first half. He saw a source of brute force power. He saw a bomb. I saw a miracle." She enlarged the graph from the shutdown sequence. "This," she said, tapping the dummy load data. "The sequence we used to bleed off the energy. We tuned the resonance, remember? Like a guitar string. We created a sympathetic harmonic field." She looked at Julian, her eyes challenging him to keep up. "That is the Helios project. Not infinite energy from a single point. That's a brute's dream, and it's impossible. But this is a way to transmit energy, wirelessly, safely, across vast distances by tuning sympathetic harmonic fields. We don't need to build one giant unstable generator. We can build a network. It's not a generator, Julian. It's a conductor." Julian stared at the screen, the implications washing over him like a physical shock. He wasn't just looking at a failed project. He was looking at the birth of a new one. Something far bigger, more elegant, and more revolutionary than his father had ever imagined. "You mean," he breathed, "we can broadcast power, like Wi-Fi, no cables, no grid loss, just clean energy, beamed anywhere." "Exactly," Evelyn said. "No cascade, no explosion, just power, everywhere. That was the real project, the one your father was too afraid or too arrogant to see." Julian Thorne was silent for a long, heavy minute. He looked at the data, a road map to the future written by the woman he'd humiliated less than 12 hours ago. He looked at the faces of his team, who were now looking at Evelyn as if she were the only thing holding up the sky. Then his eyes drifted to the wall, to the huge, three-dimensional chrome logo that dominated the control room. Thorne Dynamics. The future is ours, his father's legacy. Built on a lie, a theft, and a catastrophic error. It was a monument to an ego that had almost vaporized an entire state. He turned to his security chief, who had been standing silently by the door. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice quiet but final. "Sir?" "Call a press conference. I want every major outlet here by noon. Get the entire board on a video call, and get our legal team on the line." "What are the instructions, sir?" Julian looked back at Evelyn. "Draft a full confession. I want the world to know the truth, all of it. About Dr. Reed, about my father, about the flaw." He took a deep breath. and I want to change the name of this facility, effective immediately." 3 days later, the world was still reeling. Julian Thorne, in a stunning press conference held in the desert shadow of the now infamous facility, had done the unthinkable. He had committed corporate harakiri, and in doing so, had saved his company. He stood in front of the world's media and told the unvarnished truth. He spoke of his father's theft and his own arrogant, willful ignorance. He publicly and profusely apologized to the scientific community, to his shareholders, and most of all to Dr. Reed. And then he stepped aside. "Thorne Dynamics, as you knew it, is entering a new era," he announced, his voice carrying over the stunned silence. "An era of truth and real innovation. The Helios project is dead. In its place, we are launching a new initiative, one based on the true science, and it will not be led by me." He gestured to the woman beside him. She was dressed in a sharp, dark blazer, her hair pulled back, her stormy eyes clear and confident as they swept over the sea of reporters. "I am turning over the entire R&D division, along with a 51% controlling interest in the new project, to its rightful owner. This facility," he said, pointing up at the building behind him, "will be renamed." A massive banner unfurled, covering the old logo. The new one read, "The Reed Thorne Institute for Harmonic Resonance." "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian said, his voice thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him. "Please welcome the future, the founder, chief, and lead scientist of the Institute, Dr. Evelyn Reed." Evelyn stepped up to the microphone. The roar of camera shutters was deafening. She was no longer Elena Sanchez, the waitress. She was no longer Sarah Jennings, the runaway. She was no longer a ghost. She looked into the cameras, into the eyes of the world, and took a deep breath. "For 5 years I was silent. I was told my work was a warning. I was told it was a bomb. But I was wrong. It wasn't a warning." A small, powerful smile touched her lips. "It was an instruction. The universe," she said, her voice clear and strong, "is not about force. It's about understanding. It's not a secret language for the elite. It's a conversation. And I am finally ready to build." Julian watched her from the side, a new, unfamiliar feeling settling in his chest. It wasn't the pride of ownership. It was the humility of discovery. He had lost his father's tarnished legacy, but he had saved his company, his people, and his own soul. And he had, in the process, given a genius her voice back. It was, he realized, the first truly brilliant thing he had ever done. And so, the waitress who was a ghost became the woman who would redefine the future. Evelyn Reed got her name, her work, and her life back. And Julian Thorne learned that true power isn't about inheriting a name. It's about having the courage to correct a legacy. The Helios bomb was disarmed, and in its place, a new technology was born. One built not on theft and arrogance, but on truth and collaboration. The story reminds us that genius can be found anywhere, even behind a waitress's apron, and that sometimes the most arrogant voices are the ones hiding the most devastating mistakes. The truth, no matter how long it's hidden, always finds a way to the surface. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible story. What did you think of Evelyn's courage? Could you have stayed silent? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories about justice, hidden identities, and epic plot twists, please like this video and share it with someone who needs a good story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We have new stories coming for you every week. Thanks for watching.